So for my individual video reflection project, I'm going to compare and contrast basically Vietnamese versus American cultural norms. So for greetings, I realized that in Vietnamese culture, it's much more strict and like formal, I'd say, just because everyone has titles basically, and you need to address them by their titles as you need to like stay respectful. And for example, like you need to greet your elders, for example, um old men, you'd have to call them and older ladies, you would call them ba. So, for example, to a ba and to a and then even if like you're around the same age as someone and they're a guy, you would still have to treat them respectfully and like call them an. So, for example, you'd say jiao an, stuff like that. However, in American culture, it's much more um relaxed and casual, I'd say, just because you can say like hi or hey, hello, but then you can also like add like sir or ma'am, but like you don't need to, just to stay respectful. Um, and then for romantic relationships, I noticed that it's more acceptable to date even like at younger ages when you're here. But like in Vietnam, it's stricter just because, at least from my experience, my grandparents didn't want me to date um until I like was finished with college. Like I feel like that's kind of late, but I feel like that is a general consensus among like a lot of older Vietnamese people. And then more so, it's acceptable to basically move out at early ages, like as early as 18 here, but it's considered like the norm basically to get married and then you can move out, but not like earlier than that. Um, for entering house practices, I wanted to talk about how it's okay to basically wear shoes in American households, but then like in Vietnamese households and like other cultures as well, um, you aren't allowed to wear shoes in the house and you have to take them off and like you'll have like a shoe rack like by the door basically. And I feel like this was a big culture shock for me just because I grew up in a Vietnamese household and I grew up always like having to take off my shoes before I went into house. Um, however, like semi recently, like after meeting my stepdad, we now like wear shoes in the house. Like we won't wear them everywhere, but like it's okay to walk around the house with shoes on, like sneakers. And same thing, like washing dishes. I also grew up like not really using the dishwasher and basically using it as like storage. Like especially at my grandparents' house, they'll use it to store their pots and pans as well as Tupperware. But then like now like we'll use the dishwasher like every week. Like not all the time, but like basically recently I learned how to use the dishwasher for the first time. So yeah. And then family. I think a family is basically like, of course, family is important in both cultures, but I think that there's more of an emphasis on family, I think, in Vietnamese culture, just because even after you get married and you have kids, there is like somewhat of an expectation that you need to take care of your parents. So, like, a lot of the times, like, you'll live with your kids and your wife and everything, but you also live with your grandparents. And then in American cultures, it's perfectly like normal to live in separate houses and then like see each other on like holidays, and stuff like that, and like just visit. I think that cultural norms basically affected me personally just because it affects how I view situations and it affects how comfortable I am and it definitely affects how I interact with others and just like basically the expectations of how you communicate with others. Um, and I definitely think it affects local communities just because like how you interact with others, it basically sets the standard for what's acceptable to do and like how you should approach people a certain way. And so yeah.